Welcome back. In the last video, we described one method of sending a fire alarm signal from a school or any other building in a town to the fire department. And we said that it goes from the school to a dispatch center, and the dispatch center would then call the fire department or the nearest fire department. And the method we used was a digital dialer. So in this video, I'm going to show you another method, and that's what is called a tones transmitter. It's not used as much anymore as it was even 5 years ago when I started doing this, because of a newer technology that's more common, and we'll go over that in the future. But this one is called a tones transmitter, and it uses a principle called reverse polarity. If you can follow along with me here, this is kind of the outline. This green thing here is our fire alarm panel. You can see I did the dotted lines again to kind of show that there's more to it. And this blue rectangle in here is a module that would be added to the panel. Now sometimes there's a reverse polarity output already on the fire alarm panel. It totally depends on what model of panel you have. Usually it's an additional module that you'll either snap onto some pins on the panel, or it will be mounted in the cabinet and physically wired up to the panel. There's different ways of doing it, but either way it's going to produce usually a couple different outputs. But let's just focus on the reverse polarity output on this module. So reverse polarity is a concept we introduced once before, and that's when we were describing horn circuits or NAC circuits. If you remember, on a NAC circuit, the standby voltage would be, let's say, a positive 24 volts, and when it goes into alarm, it reverses, or possibly vice versa. Maybe the standby, I think the way I presented it was the standby voltage would be a negative 24 volts, and when it went into alarm, it would switch. Well, this is a very similar concept. So what happens is this little output here, let's say in a normal situation when the panel's clear, there's a positive 24 volts on this output of the panel. If the panel were to go into trouble, so you open up a wire on either a horn circuit or maybe the battery's low, whatever kind of trouble it is, any trouble at all in the system, this is going to drop out to 0 volts. Okay, so now there'll be no voltage on here. If the panel were to go into alarm, this would go to a negative 24 volts, and that's why it's called reverse polarity. The polarity would reverse when it goes into alarm. Okay, so let's wire this up. This thing over here, this module in orange, is the tones transmitter module. The only company that I know of that makes this is Keltron, and that's a company you'll hear more about because they make radios, which is a newer technology and newer way of sending signals to the fire alarm monitoring station. But what this does is it takes that 24 volts, that reverse polarity signal, and it converts it to a tone. And that tone is kind of arbitrary for the user, for the technician, or for the dispatcher, but it's a tone that the central receiver, same thing we had in the last situation, which would receive that signal, that phone call from the digital dialer. That tone means something to this receiver. And this receiver, once again, would convert that to a signal that a dispatcher could understand. So let's wire this module up. What happens exactly? Well, it needs power, just like the last thing did. So we're going to take our 24 volts off our panel. This again would be non-resettable power because we don't want it to drop out if we hit reset. And we wire it there. So now it's got 24 volts. Then we would take, now maybe this is labeled for standby. This is negative when the panel's not in trouble or alarm. Positive and negative. And then the output would be a pair of phone wires just like before, but it's a little bit different. It's not, see, phone wires have, regular phone wires, if you picked up your phone in your house, that's the same type of phone line that you would have at a business or at a school in our example. Those wires have between 48 and 52 volts for the most part on them, always. That's kind of how the phones work, and maybe we'll do a video at some point a little more in depth on that. But in this circumstance, we're putting the tone or the voltage on those wires. So this is just a dead pair of copper wires that goes from here through the network and into the central receiver. But it's a different network. It's not exactly the phone. It's not the same wires you would use if you had a digital dialer. This is just copper wires that have no voltage on them at all. So you'd have this going, you could say, you could look at it as positive and negative, but really it's going to be a tone at this point, because that's what this whole module does, is converts it to a tone. So when the panel's clear, you have your 24 volts going into this. When it goes into trouble, this voltage would drop out from this reverse polarity module. It would go to maybe 0 volts if it were in trouble, and so now there'd be nothing on here, and there'd be no tone being put out. And if the panel went into alarm, it would go to negative 24 volts, and the tone would change. You can put what's called a butt set, which is, maybe you've seen an AT&T guy or some telephone employee with this big telephone looking thing that's got a couple of alligator clips on it, and you could plug up to wires, and you could actually listen to what's going on. I could walk up to your house. You'd have a little gray telephone box somewhere, and I could put my butt set onto your phone line and listen to your conversation if I wanted to. Well, this I could hook it up to this also and listen to the change in tone. So when it's in alarm, I can hear the difference between alarm and trouble. If you're standing right next to the panel and you hook up to this, you could hear the tone get. It's a really high pitched tone, and you could hear it get higher. Maybe at some point in the future we'll do a video on it. Now, this is sort of an outdated technology. It still exists in some towns. I live in the Chicagoland area, and when I started 5 years ago, this was extremely common in the suburbs. Many towns use this technology. Now it's very rare to see this anymore, but the reverse polarity principle still exists, and it's still used very frequently. And I think I'm going to leave this video off there, because I will show you in the next video. I think I'm going to cover radios, which is the newer form of sending a signal, and a lot of radios will use that reverse polarity signal. So that's it for now, and I'll see you in the next video.